Chapter 9, The Ponies' Hero. Darren walked briskly through the streets of Ponyville toward his destination. As he passed, ponies paused whatever they were doing to wave, or call out a greeting. Darren returned their waves, and acknowledged their greetings with a polite nod and a smile. Never slowing his pace, his finely tuned hearing allowed him to listen in on snatches of conversation as he passed. There he goes. Handsome? Hero. Heard he wouldn't take the money. Heart of gold. Wish he were mine. Darren allowed the praise to register in his mind, but took pride only in the knowledge that his efforts were helping the town. Darren himself sought no accolades, only the knowledge that he was aiding the community. Though that's not to say he didn't appreciate the recognition. As he walked through the streets, the Doomslayer noted the progress of the repairs. Thanks to the tireless efforts of the Ponyville sawmill and dozens of volunteers, several frameworks for new houses had already been laid. Darren marveled at the incredible speed with which the repairs were taking place, thanks to the combined efforts of the town. As it was, 3 house frames were nearly complete, and Darren saw that they were already preparing the bricks and stucco that would be used to create the walls. Darren smiled as he watched the various Pegasi, earth ponies, and unicorns working together in harmony to restore the town. Unity, along with a belief that personal goals were less important than the good of all, was the force that made Equestria strong and peaceful. Humans always seem so selfish in comparison, always fighting with one another over petty differences, and often refusing any attempt at compromise. True, that wasn't universal, but sometimes it seemed that when the chips were down, humans would rather fight each other over scraps than band together. Tolerance, unity, understanding, love, and friendship, these traits seemed ingrained into the ponies at birth. Humans, on the other hand, frequently struggled with these concepts. Humans often traded integrity for wealth, principles for power, and worst of all, basic decency for the illusion of safety. However, in all fairness, the difference could be attributed to the fact that Equestria had rulers who unequivocally put their subjects before themselves. Whenever the ponies stumbled or made mistakes, the Seraphim were there to help guide them if they needed it. It was one of the many reasons the Doomslayer was proud to serve them. Darren was broken out of his musings by the realization that he had arrived at his destination. Carousel Boutique was well named, as the entire structure did indeed resemble a carnival ride turned into a building. Opening the door, the Doomslayer saw Rarity organizing a large number of boxes in the center of the room. As the door opened, a bell rang, and Rarity turned, giving Darren a warm smile. "Sir Darren, so lovely to see you again, darling. Welcome to Carousel Boutique," she greeted happily. Darren gave a polite bow before answering. "Good day, Lady Rarity, thank you for your gracious invitation," he replied formally. Rarity beamed at him. "Oh, think nothing of it, darling, it's my pleasure," she replied with a slight giggle. Darren nodded before gesturing at the small mountain of boxes. "If I may ask, milady, what is all this?" Rarity's smile broadened. Though they had only had a brief opportunity for conversation, she simply loved talking to Darren. His manners were perfect, and his refined speech was an absolute joy for her to listen to. "Oh, these. Well, as you know, a lot of ponies lost their possessions during that beastly dragon attack. So I thought it only fitting that I should donate a few garments to the needy," she explained. Darren nodded his approval. "Very generous of you, milady," he said sincerely. "Well, from what I've heard, you're no stranger to generosity yourself, darling," Rarity replied with another giggle. Darren shrugged. "I do what is needed, milady, nothing more," he stated. Rarity sighed happily. After getting over the shock of their first meeting, she had swiftly learned that Rainbow Dash had not exaggerated in the slightest about Darren's personality. He was the very definition of the chivalrous knight. "Well, Sir Darren, shall we get started?" Rarity asked, gesturing to the curtained-off changing room. Nodding, Darren entered the small room and pulled the curtain shut behind him. Now hidden from prying eyes, the Doomslayer began the process of removing his armor. First to come off were the heavy outer plates on the chest, shoulders, arms, groin, and legs. After setting those aside, Darren mentally disengaged the rest of the suit. Trails of hellish red light traced along the outside of the suit's waist, forearms, lower legs, and back. Once the light receded, seams were revealed where none had been previously, and the top half of the suit seemed to crack open from the back. Darren winced as the Neuralink sensors lining the suit's interior went offline, giving a momentary sensation of his skin suddenly being torn off. Removing his gauntlets and placing them on the ground, Darren pulled his arms out of the cuirass, allowing it to fall to the floor. After taking a brief moment to adjust to the sensation of cool air on his skin, the Doom Slayer took a seat on a stool placed inside the changing room. Reaching down, Darren removed his boots, first the left, then the right, before placing them off to the side. Finally he stood up again, and stepped out of the leggings. Grabbing a towel Rarity had thoughtfully placed on a nearby hook, Darren wrapped it securely around his waist, grabbed the crucible, and pulled back the curtain. Rarity stared. She honestly couldn't help herself. She had assumed Darren to be in good shape, but the word good didn't even begin to describe it. His body was the pinnacle of human physical perfection: athletic build, perfectly muscled limbs, six-pack abs. His body looked like it had been carved from marble by a master artist. In fact, the only imperfection that could be seen was dozens of pale jagged lines of varying sizes crisscrossing his body, so faint they were barely visible. Regardless, Rarity felt her face turning red as she drank in the sight of the Doom Slayer's godly form. "Lady Rarity, are you well?" Darren asked gently with a concerned look, snapping Rarity out of her stupor. Rarity's face grew redder still, as she realized she had been caught staring. Oh yes darling, sorry, I just, was thinking what colors would suit you best," Rarity explained, a little too loudly. Darren gave Rarity a slightly skeptical look, but then shrugged. "As you say, m'lady," he said, deciding not to press the issue. Shaking her head vigorously, Rarity focused on the task at hoof, taking the necessary measurements, and trying not to start staring again. As she made her notations on Darren's physical dimensions, Rarity felt a fair bit of purely professional excitement. After all, it wasn't every day you got to design clothing for a life form no pony had ever seen before, and she relished the challenge. Already Rarity's mind flooded with ideas and possibilities. In her head she started making a mental list of what fabric to use, how much would be needed, what colors would work best, and how it would all look once it was complete. Soon enough the measurements had all been taken, and Rarity had to try not to look disappointed as Darren re-entered the dressing room. However, as he turned, she noticed the strange object he had been holding firmly in his right hand. Till now she had been so preoccupied she hadn't really noticed it, but now it stuck out like a sore hoof. It was a horrific thing resembling the handle of a sword made of bone, and what appeared to be living flesh. Sir Darren, what is that?" Rarity asked, trying to keep her revulsion under control, as the thing seemed to radiate a sense of wrongness like a furnace radiates heat. Darren froze for a barely perceptible moment before responding. He didn't think Rarity would be satisfied with the same answer he had given Apple Bloom, Sweetie Belle, and Scootaloo. So sighing heavily, Darren turned back to look Rarity in the eye. "Forgive me, m'lady, but I'm afraid I'm not at liberty to discuss it," he stated. Rarity nodded, as she could tell from Darren's tone, that the matter was not up for debate. In a way Rarity was relieved, as she'd really rather not have noticed the object to begin with. Still, she couldn't stop herself from asking the next most obvious question. "Why is that?" she asked, a trifle hesitantly. Darren sighed heavily before replying. "Because merely the knowledge of what this is, could endanger you. Please believe me when I tell you that the less you know about this object, the safer you shall be," he explained. Nodding slowly, Rarity decided that it was best to take Darren's word for it. As he walked away from Carousel Boutique, Darren took the moment to reflect on recent events. His arrival, the fight against the dragons, meeting a new Seraphim, meeting new friends, helping rebuild the town, the fight against the Timber Wolves. It was hard to believe that less than a week ago he had been on another planet, in another dimension, fighting to stop a mad scientist from unleashing Armageddon. Staring down at the crucible in his hand, Darren also realized that this was perhaps the first time he felt he could claim an actual victory. Most of the time he merely felt like he was only delaying the inevitable, or just scraping through by the skin of his teeth. He had never been able to truly enjoy winning a battle, because the war felt like it was never going to end. The closest he had come to feeling a sense of true victory, had been nearly 1200 years ago, when he first met Luna and Celestia. He longed to see them again, and to give them the news they no doubt most wished to hear, that hell had lost, and the gates of heaven were secured. Reattaching the crucible to his belt, Darren headed toward the construction sites. Repairs were progressing, but they weren't yet complete. There was still work to do, and now that he was finished with Rarity, Darren needed to get back to it. After being trapped in an eternal sleep for several hundred years, Darren relished the chance to do something positive with his strength. Arriving at the location he had passed on his way to the boutique, Darren headed toward a makeshift work table covered in architectural plans. A pair of hard hat-wearing earth ponies pointed at the blueprints as they discussed the finer points of the construction. "The frame is almost ready, but only on 3 sides, and we need to make sure the floors are all level before we go any farther," said the first pony, a grizzled middle-aged stallion with a gray mane and tan coat, his flank adorned with a hammer and nail cutie mark. "I told you Pa, I checked the floors myself and they're fine," spoke his assistant, and apparent daughter. A teenage mare with a short-cut red mane, white coat, and a cutie mark displaying a level and protractor over a blue sheet of paper. "Did you check 'em twice?" asked the stallion archly. "Well, no," but she replied, before her father cut her off. "But nothing, Lily, measure twice, cut once, you know that," the stallion admonished. "But Dad," she began, at which point Darren decided to weigh in. "Excuse me, please forgive the interruption, but I am inclined to agree with the gentle colt," he stated calmly. "See Lily, this stallion knows what's." He trailed off as he looked up to see who had spoken. "Mr. Grendel?" he said, shocked. "I'm so sorry, I didn't realize you were coming by. What can I do for you?" he asked, apparently embarrassed he hadn't noticed Darren's approach. Darren smiled warmly as he responded. "Honestly, I was going to ask you that very question. I was hoping to aid in the repair effort. That is, if you have a spot for me," he explained. The stallion's face did a couple of contortions before settling on a thoughtful frown. However, before he could answer, his daughter spoke up. "Oh wow! Can he, Dad, please, please?" the young mare asked, shooting Darren looks of fangirl adoration. The stallion gave his daughter a reproachful look, before returning his attention to Darren. "In all honesty, Mr. Grendel, we already have more than enough hoofs to do the work. The only place we're short-staffed is in the more technical parts of the construction, planning, drafting, adjusting blueprints, that sort of thing. Are you any good with that kind of work?" he asked. Darren sighed, and shook his head. "I am afraid not. Architecture was never a skill I was trained in," he said apologetically. The stallion shook his head. "That's what I was afraid of. I don't want to waste your time just giving you busy work, so I'm afraid I'll have to decline your offer. Besides, after all you've done for this town, you deserve a break," he said sincerely, as his daughter's face fell. Darren nodded. "I understand, thank you for your time, and do let me know if you happen to change your mind," he replied with a smile, and a polite bow. As he turned to leave, however, the stallion spoke up. "Mr. Grendel?" he asked. "Yes?" Darren replied, turning back. The stallion seemed to take a moment to find the right words before replying. "Well, just on a personal note, I wanted to say thank you. You may not have realized it, but I was right behind the princess during the dragon attack. Those monsters would have killed us all if you hadn't shown up, of that I have no doubt. You saved me and my family's lives that day, and that's something I'm never gonna forget. If you ever need anything from me and mine, you only have to ask," he said feelingly. Darren smiled gratefully. I appreciate your words very much, Mr. Brownstone, he stated with a small smile of his own. Mr. Brownstone, and as it happens there is something I could use your help with, Darren stated. You just name it. Brownstone declared happily. I require assistance finding the Sweet Apple Acres farm. If you could point me in the proper direction I would be most grateful, Darren said with a smile. Brownstone's daughter instantly spoke up. Ooh, I know the way. I can take him. She practically shouted. Brownstone looked into his daughter's pleading eyes before letting out a sigh. Mr. Grandal, this is my daughter Lily, if you like she can show you the way to Sweet Apple Acres. Darren gave a gentle smile. I would be honored, he said with a short bow. Yes, Lily shouted before grabbing Darren's hand with her hoof. It's right this way, Mr. Grandal, she said giddily. Lead the way, milady, Darren said with a grateful smile. Applejack wiped the sweat from her brow with the back of a hoof as she paused in her work. Glancing down the all but endless rows of fruit-laden apple trees she sighed heavily. As much as she hated to admit it, the farm was getting just too big for a mere 4 ponies to manage. Actually, because of Granny Smith's age, it was more like 3.5 ponies these days. Not to mention that recently Applejack and Big Mac had added several more rows of trees to the equation. The idea had been to offset some of the loss of trees to the vampire fruit bats that had moved in a year or so ago. However, they had severely overestimated how much of a loss the bats had actually caused. Now they were stuck with too many trees for not nearly enough ponies. Applejack almost wished there were more vampire fruit bats to redress the balance. One positive of the increased number of trees was that they had the bits to hire some help. Unfortunately, they had not found any pony qualified, and were running themselves ragged trying to maintain all the trees. However, at Twilight's suggestion, Applejack had agreed to offer the job to some pony who at the very least was certainly strong enough for the job. So when do you think Mr. Darren's gonna get here, sis? Asked Apple Bloom eagerly. Applejack looked down at her sister's enthusiastic face with mixed feelings. On the one hoof, Darren was the hero who saved all of Ponyville, including her sister, from a group of vicious dragons. On the other hoof, he was a force of unrelenting fury that could destroy all of Equestria if he so chose. However, it was abundantly clear that Apple Bloom trusted him fully, and Big Mac, who had actually been in town during the dragon attack, said he'd be happy to have Darren on the farm. Granny Smith had also given a yes vote to the idea, saying that any pony who risked their life to save others must have a good heart. Applejack didn't doubt that Darren was a good stallion, she just felt like she needed more time to process everything. Nevertheless, she had told Twilight to extend the invitation to him, now she was just waiting to hear back. I'm not really sure, Sugarcube, he might not even show up today, heck, he might not take the job at all. Applejack replied. Apple Bloom's face fell a little. So, you don't think he's coming? She asked, trying to hide her disappointment. Applejack smiled, ruffling her sister's mane affectionately. Now I didn't say that, I'm just sayin' we have to be patient. Sides y'all know him better'n me, so really I should be asking you if you think he'll come, she said with a chuckle. Apple Bloom smiled at that, before looking thoughtful. He'll come, she said with absolute certainty. Applejack arched an eyebrow. Oh, what makes y'all so sure? She asked with a smile. Apple Bloom pointed a hoof. 'Cause he's right over there, she declared in a slightly smug tone. Turning around, Applejack saw that her sister was right. Walking up the path was the man himself chatting with a pony she recognized as Lily, the daughter of Mr. Brownstone. As she watched, Darren said something to Lily before giving a bow, to which she nodded vigorously, then shot back down the path to Ponyville. Continuing up the path on his own, Applejack had to admit Darren cut an impressive figure. His stride was one of quiet confidence, his head held high, and gazing ahead as he moved forward with a gentle smile on his face. He seemed at once, at peace, and powerful. Like a warrior king, ready to bring order to chaos, either by wisdom or force. This image was only reinforced by the way the rows of trees seemed like pillars in a great temple. The light playing down through the canopy creating the image of one blessed by some form of divinity. Applejack almost felt like she should be bowing. "Mr. Grandel!" Apple Bloom shouted, running toward the figure. Darren gave a broad smile as he knelt to greet his young friend. "Good day, Apple Bloom, I trust you have been well?" Darren asked gently. Apple Bloom nodded vigorously. "Yep, are y'all gonna work on the farm with us?" she asked excitedly. Darren inclined his head. "I am indeed, if your siblings find me a satisfactory candidate, of course," he replied. Apple Bloom practically jumped for joy. "Well then come on and I'll introduce you to Em," she said, grabbing Darren's hand. Crouching slightly, Darren allowed Apple Bloom to lead him by the hand toward her sister. Then, for just an instant, the image changed. Darren was no longer being led forward by Apple Bloom, but by a young human girl of 12 in a light blue dress. She had fiery red hair like her mother, and piercing blue eyes like her father. She smiled up at him with a face full of freckles, the sun playing off her fair skin. "Aren't you happy, Daddy?" she asked happily. Then Darren blinked, and he once again found himself hand in hoof with Apple Bloom. "I'm sorry, what?" Darren asked, slightly confused. "I said, aren't y'all happy you're gonna be working at Sweet Apple Acres?" Apple Bloom repeated. "Oh, yes, it will be good to get back to working the land again," he said, smiling. Apple Bloom smiled back up at Darren, and he had to struggle to remember that the girl she so reminded him of, had died over 1,000 years ago.